Welcome to biology class. We are doing chapter The Flower. In the previous video, we have discussed the structure and function of four whorls of the flower. We all know that the flower is the reproductive organ of plant. The function of the flower is to produce seeds and fruits for reproduction. The first step for achieving it is the transfer of pollen grains to the stigma of a flower, a process known as pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower. It is of two kinds, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination. This kind of pollination involves the same plant. It is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same plant. It generally takes place in bisexual flowers because they have both male and female reproductive parts. Cross-pollination. This kind of pollination involves two different plants of the same kind. The transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of the same kind is called cross-pollination. Pollen grains are non-motile. They cannot reach the stigma on their own. Therefore, an external agent is needed to carry out the process of pollination. Some of the agents of pollination are insects, wind, water, and animals.
Pollination. It is the process by which pollen grains are transferred to the female reproductive organs of a plant. In other words, pollen from the anther are transferred to the stigma. Does this process occur only between two flowers of the same type? Yes, that is correct. Pollination occurs between the flowers belonging to the same type. And does that mean pollination occurs only between two flowers born on the same plant? That question leads us to the types of pollination. The type in which pollination occurs between flowers born on the same plant is called as self-pollination. So what will the next type be? The other type of pollination is called cross-pollination, where the pollens travel from the anther to the stigma of a different flower on another plant. Can you guess how this process of transfer of pollen grains occurs? For this, there are several agents which aid the process. Agents such as wind and water are the abiotic ones. On the other hand, biotic pollinators such as bees, bats, moths, and birds also help in the process.
The second step of reproduction is fertilization. The process of fusion of male gamete with the female gamete is known as fertilization. The pollen grains are transferred by the agents of pollination to the stigma of the same or different flower. The pollen grain develops a pollen tube that penetrates the stigma and runs down the style to reach the ovary. On reaching the ovary, the fusion of male gamete with the female gamete takes place. What happens after fertilization? After the fertilization, the ovary begins to grow and develops into a fruit. Thus, a fruit can also be called a matured or ripened ovary. The ovule present inside the ovary develops into a seed, and the remaining parts of the flower, like petals, sepals, stamen, stigma, and style, dry off and wither away. So children, today we have discussed pollination and its two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. We have also learnt about fertilization. In the absence of honeybees, the yield of sunflower goes down tremendously. Why? Think about it. We will discuss in our next interactive class. Thank you children. Take care of yourself. Stay safe. Stay healthy.